Yep.
So we've just started recording here at the LeedsAzure user group, where we've got a couple of guests this evening. First up, we've got Matteo Emili, and I'll hand over to Matteo, and he can.
Hi everyone. Welcome everyone to the session. It's good to be back. I just skipped a month unfortunately with my meetup and other meetups because of all sorts of reasons, but it's so good to be back and talking to people. So I'm Matteo. I work at Azure UK and Ireland as a manager for software engineering, but I'm also a Microsoft MVP for Azure DevOps. And tonight, what I would like to talk about is cleaning up some confusion, basically. So talking about GitHub, Azure DevOps, and how the two of them play well together. So, so Microsoft acquired GitHub in June 2008. I remember that day very well, and I know it's always fun to remember, but I was poolside. I was on holiday, and I received an email stating Microsoft acquires GitHub, and so on and so forth. And I thought that it was an interesting piece of news because it was obviously going to change a few things. The acquisition completed without problems in October 2018, but 2 years later, we are not where I thought we were going to be. I thought that directions could have been slightly different, and that was my personal opinion. So I thought that things might not have played that well. But eventually, I'm in a situation where people ask me, what should I choose? And the answer is usually the same that I always give out when I'm asked point blank if there is anything specific to choose. It's simply choose what fits your organization best. Because even if things have gone in a certain way with GitHub, and again, it is my personal opinion, but obviously I thought that things were going to go on a much quicker pace. So I thought that certain things of GitHub would have been coming out sooner rather than later. But I'm very happy to see where GitHub is today, and I'm also very happy to see where Azure DevOps is today. So I was completely on the wrong side of my opinion when I thought that things were going to go in a different way. So what should you choose? Well, you should choose what fits your organization best, simply because there is no one size fits all. So GitHub is a brilliant platform. Azure DevOps is a brilliant platform. You should choose what your organization is going to benefit from. You should choose something that's going to play well within the culture that you've got and within the way that the organization works. So if you want to go down a certain path, you should make sure that you have critical mass with your people and you have critical mass with your team so that either way you do the right choice. The reason is simple. When we talk about DevOps, I love the definition Donovan Brown has got of DevOps. That's the union of people, process, and tools to ensure continuous delivery of value. That means that tools only come out last. You need to make sure that people are on board, that you have a solid process, and eventually that you've got tools that support your organization and your development teams. Those tools can be anything, okay? So Azure DevOps obviously has got certain top strengths, Azure boards and Azure pipelines, the biggest ones that I can think of. Where Azure boards, for example, is brilliant if you want to have a visual way of representing work with different hierarchies, portfolios, etc. It is brilliant for heterogeneous teams. Azure pipelines, you've got both a nice UI option, but you also have the power of pipelines as code. So it's something that's very heterogeneous and very flexible for every team. And that's still a top strength. It doesn't mean that with GitHub being one of the two Microsoft platforms for DevOps, one of the two is going to go away. It's not the case. Microsoft hasn't said anything like that. And it's still out there, still being developed with so many developments and so much adoption over there. So it is a brilliant thing to use. And I really enjoy using Azure pipelines in particular because it gives me so much flexibility when I do things that with other platforms I could get, but with so much more work to be put in. On the other side, you have GitHub, where the top strengths are the developer experience. It's de facto open source standard. GitHub is easy to use, and it is easy for every developer to pick up. And it's the stronger thing for GitHub is simply this. It's easy to use. It's the de facto open source standard. So that's where you get buy-in from teams, and that's where you get benefit as an organization. That said, it doesn't mean that one is better than the other. It doesn't mean that either way you go, you need to make a hard and fast choice, because GitHub like Azure repos, they're both based on Git, for example. So the day you want to move across, you're moving away from one platform to the other, but you're going with a Git repository. So your information, your history is still there. It's just a different experience. And this is very important. It's no longer like 10 years ago when we used to have a lock-in within platforms where it was very difficult to move. You needed hard migrations with custom toolings or whatever. We're talking about code here. We're talking about Git as a least common denominator. So it is a very simple experience, and all it matters in terms of choice is that you go with what's really good for the organization. So you can integrate them. You should integrate them. You should create your platform that's tailored to your needs. You should create something that works for everyone and works for your users. So if you need to use a certain mix of tools, that is good and it is absolutely doable. You don't have to make, again, a hard and fast choice where you do things and you should only do things within a certain platform. I've got many experiences where I could do both things with both platforms. So that's not a problem. That's not a blocker for you in terms of adoption. You should do what works for your teams. And the way that you can integrate Azure DevOps and GitHub is a simple one that we will see in a moment. But the reasons that you might want to do this, there are so many reasons for it. So it might be because you want to give your developers a certain experience, the de facto open source experience, and then you might want to have a different experience for non-technical people, for managers, for project managers or delivery leads or whatever other people are part of a team, or they need to consume the information that the team is putting in. So those kind of integrations build up the foundation that you're building upon. So what you should do, for example, if you use GitHub Action and Azure Pipeline, you can have effectively both platforms connected together. Or another thing that you can do is having GitHub issues and Azure boards together, where you're providing different views to different audiences in this case. Both of these and many more examples are possible using GitHub Actions. And GitHub Actions is the glue that keeps the two platforms together. So I'm done with the slides, and I just want to show you how to do things and why we should do things this way. So this is a simple application. It is literally the result of .NET New in a command line. There's nothing fancy to it. What's really interesting is the action portion. So whenever you start creating GitHub Actions, GitHub Action workflows within your organization or your project, all of these workflows that represent the activities that you're doing, they're going to end up in your repository under this hidden folder over here. And those are code files. It's no more than that. Okay, so everything is contained within a YAML file. What's important to know for GitHub Actions is that this is not just a CI/CD platform. It's not just an orchestrator for build and release. This is something that spans across the whole platform. So whatever you want to do within GitHub, it can most likely be automated by using GitHub Actions. And that's extremely important, because if we start looking at one of the definitions, I'll move to Visual Studio Code here. What we can do is obviously do stuff like simple build, and that's straightforward. As you can see, this is a traditional CI build. Maybe too much. Traditional CI build where I'm picking up a Ubuntu agent. I'm going to check out my code, set up .NET Core with version 3.1.101, and then I'm going to run .NET build, publish, and a number of things after that. Now, those number of things, they're very important because, for example, over here, I'm logging in onto my Azure tenant, and then I'm going to publish some packages using the Azure DevOps CLI towards Azure DevOps so that I can consume packages created with this command over here for a pipeline that's hosted in Azure DevOps. That's the kind of integration that you can get, and that's the ease of use that you get when you use those kind of jobs, basically. And again, it's all pipelines as code, so it is nothing new for the industry. It's nothing that's completely different. It's fairly standard, and you can expect everything that you would expect from a regular CI/CD pipeline orchestrator. Sorry. Now, the experience over here, obviously, this is code, and you get all the coding experience. But if you go into GitHub, and let's say you start editing from the web, you have a marketplace like you had with Azure DevOps. So yes, you can obviously write your own YAML file manually, but you have some aids. So if I pick up, let's say, .NET, actually the wrong example, but if I pick up, yeah, there's your CLI. There's your CLI, you've got an action, sorry, you've got an action that you can start copying and pasting directly from here. So you have an ease of use experience, a simple experience that will guide you through it. Obviously, you don't have a GUI, you don't have things to just check in and manually select, but still, for a pipeline as code experience, this is great, okay? Because you just need to copy and paste this, and then you start running whatever script, in this case, you need to run. For something like pipelines, same story. So if you go back, you search for Azure pipeline, you go over here and you copy and paste everything that you need. You also have a secret handling. So you can handle secrets in a secure way, simple by going under settings, and then you can store your secrets, and your secrets can be evaluated securely within a pipeline. You can also have organizational secrets. So secrets that span across a GitHub organization, that would be the equivalent of an Azure DevOps organization. You might have secrets spanning all over for whatever reason. So those are the basics, and there isn't really nothing more that you need to start getting productive with GitHub Actions, because the moment you start building things, then you will see that you have things that you can automate, and every automation within GitHub will happen with GitHub Action. Now, one of the things that are usually asked with Actions is the possibility of running a workflow manually. So that's a change that was recently introduced by using this keyword up here. This workflow dispatch event is going to allow you to actually run commands manually, and that is a very welcome news, because many people were asking for the possibility of running workflows like this, where otherwise the alternative was to either push a white space change or push any other change, or some people were monitoring the watch and unwatch event. So there were so many options to actually do that in a sort of manual way. But this is obviously better, because you don't have to do anything workaround-ish, sketchy, if you like, but you can just click the button. And that's a change from a couple of weeks ago that was really, really welcomed by many teams that I know about. When a workflow runs, it's going to run in a similar fashion to Azure pipeline. So in this case, it's going to pick up a Ubuntu agent, and the Ubuntu agent is going to run my job. I only have one job over here, of course, that it's running, and it is just executing every single step like we define them in the pipeline file. The idea here is that you can replicate exactly what you do from your local machine down to the orchestrator. So that's the reason why things are kept simple, and actions are actually just nice wraparounds over standard actions. No pun intended on that. It is extremely valuable because it allows you to replicate what you do locally in a very easy fashion, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel, or you don't have to introduce variables. So, for example, when we talk about publishing a package to Azure Packages, what I'm running is a simple set of lines of code, 3 lines of script, that would be exactly the same code that I would run locally. I don't have a custom action. I don't have anything that's going to be done on purpose. I don't have a piece of code or a piece of software that I need to run to achieve this goal. All I'm going to do is run AZ extension add and the Azure DevOps extension like I would in my local Azure CLI, and then I'm going to log in over there and publish the artifact. Exactly the same steps that I would follow over my local computer. So this is running now. Yeah, I know I've fallen back to file storage. It will be clear running Azure DevOps logout. But in a nutshell, what I'm doing here is running a set of tasks that could be run on my local machine. Now, the interesting thing here is that by connecting Azure pipelines and GitHub Actions, in this specific case, I'm separating CI and CD. And that is done on purpose, because what I want to do is to leverage leverage GitHub Actions, the fact that it's integrated with GitHub. So in this case, I want to have everything on this platform for what regards code development. And then I'm pushing it to another system, to another orchestrator, which is this one over here, and it should be running fully. So I'm pushing everything over here, where here I might be leveraging the power of Azure pipelines, where you have environments, where you can have traceability, where you can do so many different things that you can't do with GitHub Actions. So you get the best of both worlds with a simple thin layer of integration. And this over here is a very simple demo pipeline that it is running. And I'll actually show you what it does. So this demo pipeline is literally just going to get the package that was created on the feed. It's going to create the latest, it's going to get the latest version. But it's just to show you that you don't need anything special run this pipeline, but you also don't need a thick layer of integration. So in this case, I'm running a simple pipeline with no reference to GitHub whatsoever. But at the same time, I'm not using some hack over APIs or anything. I'm literally just calling the project URL, the pipeline name, and I'm authenticating with a PAT. So that this is all I'm doing. It's simple, it's thin, and it works pretty well. Is there any question on the CI/CD story?
Nope, not from me.
Okay.
Anybody else that's in the meeting, you can feel free to come off mute and ask away.
Or even on the chat, possibly. Okay, there is someone in the chat, perhaps. It is just loading. Sorry, if it's slow.
It was just saying evening all earlier.
Okay, fine. So this is a simple example. This is something that will allow you to hit the ground running and starting doing things easily. But again, the big power of GitHub Actions is that it's an orchestrator that spans across the platform. So you can do so many more things. And what I really like doing with it is integrating Azure boards and GitHub. So things like issues to work items. Okay, this is something that I do to integrate issues that are created on GitHub towards an Azure DevOps organization. So imagine the scenario: you have a development team that might be doing open source, it might be doing inner source, whatever else, and they love GitHub, okay, because the experience is great. So they want to stay on GitHub, but they might also have a team or a leadership or a management layer that wants to see things in Azure DevOps because they like the hierarchy. They like the fact that in Azure DevOps, you have a visual representation for every type of work item that you can customize the process. So those sort of things are loved by certain categories of users. So you don't have to force things one way or the other. If someone is going to open an issue, which is like a ticket, if you like, okay, so you can create an issue. You can say, okay, I need a title and I need a description. So the first steps, example. And this is Markdown, so you can style it as you want. Once you submit the issue, what's going to happen is that an action is going to be triggered. And this action, which is, well, this one over here, effectively, is going to use a GitHub action from Dan Hellem, one of the program managers at GitHub, that are going to synchronize all your new issue towards a certain Azure DevOps project with a certain work item type, mapping the states. So something like this is as an integration layer. This is something straightforward. You just create it, you store it in your repository, and it is there. Once you get onto Azure DevOps, you will see that not only you have a nice integration between the two, but you have information that filters through from GitHub down to Azure DevOps. So this is a rich experience, right? So if you pick this up, and my connection unfortunately is very slow tonight, so apologies for that. You see that it comes from GitHub and it is issue number 11. You can see that it is tagged as a GitHub issue and it is tagged with the name of the repository. And you can also see that you have a conversation piece over here in the discussion below that explains to you what the issue, basically where is the issue coming from. You have links to both the issue itself and the repository that's connected to it, but you also have a link as a GitHub issue over here on the right. So if you want to get the original issue, you can do so by just clicking on it. In the past, achieving this kind of integration with commercial tools was not straightforward. Okay, it was something that was fairly difficult to do, and sometimes the effort was not really worth it. Now, with this simple orchestrator running behind the scenes, you can do these things. And it doesn't work just for simple, relatively simple scenarios like this, where you just want a certain type of integration. But if you want to, let's say that this is going to be closed, I'm going to close the issue. This issue, sorry, click the wrong one, will be updated on the work item. So it keeps feeding information towards Azure DevOps, and it keeps the experience easy and straightforward for both type of users. Because once this is set up, you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about maintaining it, but you can keep rolling with it, and you can keep consuming it as a background job type of thing. So now it is in progress. It's going to run, and it always runs against a certain agent, so you can do everything you like to it. But what it's effectively doing is just running this simple piece of code. Let's take a look at the simple piece of code, to be fair with you. Because I think it's also nice. It's also a nice experience. Let's go to dance repository. So for first things first, this has been closed, and as you can see, you have the information moving through on both sides. But then, what's interesting is that if you want to send the issues to work items, should be this one, memory serves me well. Yep. So if you start looking at it, the action itself, this is the skeleton of the action. So that's a simple package for it. But once you start looking at it, you will see that the action is leveraging standard stuff. Okay, so the action is going to leverage an API layer that effectively already exists, and it is using the Node APIs over here. So you see you have an integration that it's not just what you see there, but you can also have different cases and so on. And if you want to customize it, you can do that, because this is all stuff that's exposed from the Azure DevOps APIs. So if I pick this one, for example, this is interesting. The moment where I create an issue and it is synchronized to the work item type in Azure DevOps, I'm setting up the title, I'm setting up the description, I'm setting up the tags, so GitHub issue, the repo name, and so on. I'm setting up the history and all those things. If I want to add something else, what I can do is to copy and paste this piece of code in a fork of the action, and then add the field that I'm interested in. And then you can contribute back with a pull repository, with a pull record, sorry. So that the good virtuous circle is maintained and people will get the benefit of it. But it's also a good learning experience, because if someone doesn't know how to interact with an Azure DevOps work item, for example, this is great. If you want to see in action how those things are done, this is an excellent getting started, in my opinion. It's an excellent experience if you want to understand also how to manage situations like this. If an area path is not empty, then set it. So to me, personally, it was good because not only I managed to integrate the two systems, but I also managed to learn how GitHub Action works behind the scenes and how to access Azure DevOps in the way that I'm used to do, but from within GitHub Actions. Another thing that you can do, very similar, but still on a different line. This is for bugs. Okay, so you're synchronizing issues with bugs. But if you want to run the same story towards pull request, there is another extension, another GitHub action from Dan, where you're running it for every pull request. So let's say that I'm going to run a simple one. So okay, so I'm going to run a white space change, simple, to whatever file, really doesn't really matter. Okay, this is a change, even if it's just a white space change. So simple, straightforward, nothing out of the ordinary. It is something that we do all the time, not with white space changes perhaps, but what happens over here now, and this is very interesting, if you run the pull request, and this is completely transparent to anyone, so I'm going to push develop onto master, simple change, I create the pull request. I'm not even going to complete it now, okay? So what's going to happen here is that there's going to be a workflow running behind the scenes. And this workflow is going to create a custom work item type within, within Azure DevOps so that I can track it. So if I have this kind of experience where I need to visualize on a different tool what is happening to my to my tasks, I'll pick it up now. Memory serves me well. I set it up to show up on the sprint. Yeah, there it is. Terribly slow. And this is not Azure DevOps, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's certainly not normally that slow.
No, definitely not. I'm not working from a regular location, so yeah. Let's see if I can pick it up. Okay. No, this is not it. It's not being shown because it's not on the right iteration. So I'll pick it up from here. PR number 12, white space change. It is active at the minute because I did not close it. It's been open, but it's not closed. It is connected to certain GitHub pull request. And again, this is the same the same structure, but I can also see the pull request directly within the development side here. Okay, and this is great because this enables bidirectional communication over here. I could also add things like commits potentially or other type of connections here, because you know that you have in Azure DevOps, you got the possibility of connecting GitHub over here as a service connection. So you can do it with boards and you can do it as a service. So GitHub is connected to my repository via a so-called application, and this is going to be able to consume all sorts of data coming in from GitHub. So if I close this, interestingly, I'm going to merge, I'm going to do whatever I need to the code, but first of all, well, obviously the integration is here as well because I can open the work item from here. But then the action is going to handle the fact that you already have a work item there, and it is going to run in the background. It's going to realize that there is a work item already there, so it's going to update that rather than creating a new one, a duplicate or anything. If we go back, this would be it, basically. It is closed, it's being closed, and it is exactly like you would expect. So this is a sort of integration that makes people think and wonder, because we used to work in a very siloed way. But then with DevOps, we open the floodgates for a better process. We open the floodgates for a better way of working. And one of the things that you can improve with the way of working is let people use what they like better. Let people use what they feel they're most productive with, so that they can be they can be the best at their job effectively. So if you have a team that's very happy with GitHub, there's no point in trying to slow them down and push them to a different platform. What you can do is integrating two platforms and create this nice experience. Now, for my personal opinion, GitHub is excellent for those sort of things. Azure DevOps is excellent as well. So choices are usually not as simple as choosing the development experience. But at the same time, if you want to connect the two together, it's a simple thing to do. It doesn't take too much time, and it is very robust as well. So it really lives up to its name. You can do all sorts of things here. Okay, so actions can do all sorts of things. If I go and look at the native project experience in GitHub, all of the automations that happen to a certain board, this is a separate board that's under projects in GitHub. We can explore it and actually we could create a new one. Let's create a new one. So when you create a new project, let's pick it up from scratch. This project can be obviously linked to a repository and doesn't make much of a difference, but I'm going to pick up web app just for the sake of simplicity. This is going to be a private project, but then you will have a number of templates. If you remember templates in Azure DevOps, templates were modeled on methodologies. You had Agile, you had Scrum, you had CMMI, you had others. Here, everything is based off Lean. So you have a basic Kanban, or an automated Kanban, or an automated Kanban with reviews, or back triage. The denominator here, the commonality here, is that you have automations running in the background. So if you read about that, you will have for automated Kanban style board with built-in triggers to automatically move issues and pull requests across to do, in progress, and done. If I select this, I'm going to create the board. The board is obviously going to be empty, but there's going to be automations on the column. And each column will have a manage automation link where you can create a simple experience that's going to basically move stuff across only when certain events happen. Like over here, if items are added or reopened, they immediately go back to to-do, or pull request, same stuff. And you can do the same with in progress. You can manage the automation here and have a slightly different set of options, but the experience is exactly the same. And to done, same story. You have this. Behind the scenes, this is nothing else than GitHub Actions. So this is stuff that runs all across the platform. And you will see more and more things coming this way, because this is where you can achieve the experience. It's no longer about definite features or stuff that's different from one platform to the other. It's all about the experience. And the experience is something that you can build with automations. I went very quickly tonight, I reckon. So is there any question at all? Otherwise, the slides will be available on SlideShare, and I can give some time back. That in these pandemic days, I think it's a good thing. But if there is any question, very happy to answer that.
So I've got one. I've used GitHub a lot in open source world for a number of years. I've used Azure DevOps quite a lot in enterprise world for again for a number of years. One of the key things that I hadn't seen up until today was the interaction that you've got nice there with GitHub Actions, being able to transfer from GitHub to Azure DevOps. But what about going the other way? So if you've got a public part of a project that's hosted on GitHub, but then you've got a private part of it that you're keeping in Azure DevOps.
Okay. So if you want to do like corporate open source, where you have an open source project, but you have development running behind the scenes that doesn't necessarily live within the open source repository. Is that right?
So yeah, take a model like Chef, for example. They've got an open source product, but then they've got a paid product on top of it, so which has additional features on top of the open source product. I know that Chef, they do that via GitHub, and they've got an open source GitHub repository and then a private repository. But you could do that by having the repositories in 2 different locations, couldn't you? I haven't seen any transferring of issues from the Azure DevOps side to GitHub, if that makes sense. More from GitHub to DevOps.
Well, if it's just code, and I assume you're not talking about strictly about code is trivial. It's a Git repository, so you can push whatever commit or whatever branch you want. You can push it to different repositories. That's, again, I don't think that's the scope of the question. If you want to have integration the other way, it is possible. There are integrations running over there where you can push stuff from Azure DevOps onto GitHub. But that's, yes, this is less common, obviously, because everybody wants to go onto GitHub, and they do it because of the open source experience. So the open source, obviously, is a good thing that brings people in onto that experience. And most of the open source experience happens in GitHub Enterprise as well. So that's why people are attracted to the platform. Totally understandable, to be fair. But it is absolutely possible, because Azure DevOps has got a nice integration between the two, or you can even run Azure pipelines for GitHub repositories. You can do all sorts of things over there. You can link commits from GitHub. So it is absolutely possible. It is done in a slightly different way, because you have a different integration, which I actually can show quickly, given that we have time. So if I go back to Azure DevOps, come on. Okay, if I go back to Azure DevOps, I can configure an integration between Azure DevOps and GitHub for boards, which is to get information to and from issues mainly, but also some of the comments information, because it is linked to a repository. Or I can connect it to a service connection. So if I create a service connection, as you can see, I have multiple over here. I can have a service connection that uses the Azure Pipeline app, so the app for GitHub that connects the 2 services. But I could also do the same with a personal access token, and that's fairly common in enterprise organizations, where you're just given a scope token that can do certain things. Now, this is nothing more than a service connection in Azure DevOps. Okay, it's nothing fancy. And if you look at it over here, this is another one with Azure Pipeline. This cannot be even configured, because it is using a GitHub installation token. So it is simply an application, as it's called, that connects the 2 things. Let me show it to you in the organization, actually. So if you look under your settings, you will have a number of installed apps, and those apps are the ones that manage the connection and configuration. So if I connect over here, okay. So over here, I'm going to grant access to certain repositories, or all of them potentially. It depends on the type of integration that I want, and this is going to take care of the rest. Same story for Azure boards. So if I open Azure boards and I try to configure that, this is going to do the same for either certain repositories or all repositories. So this application is going to take away all the hard lifting of a configuration and a connection between the 2 systems. Now, if you do that in Azure DevOps, and you can do that, you can do it with a PAT. So if you do it with a PAT, you need to use a slightly different experience, but it is still possible to do it like you would with any other service connection. So if you create a new service connection, you go in there, say, okay, I want a GitHub connection over here, click on next, and you can either grant the authorization via an OAuth configuration, or you can use a personal access token. So that's, as you can see, this is the Azure Pipelines application that's installed. Otherwise, you can use a PAT. Simple experience. It's exactly the same thing that you would do with any other service connection. So if you pick up very common Azure Resource Manager for Azure, you will create a connection by a service principal or by a published profile or whatever else. If you do it manually like this, that's what you're asked for. It's a similar experience. It's the same concept. So you just link the two together at the service level.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Particularly for what I'm thinking of as a potential project that I might be working on in the future, where there'll be an open source component, and then maybe closed source development that gets pushed to open source with a closed development pipeline. So it's probably adding complexity that may not be needed, but it gives a different team the ability to work on something without publicizing the team to the wider world of open source, which sometimes can be useful.
Well, I'll give you my example. One of the things that I found this integration to be very powerful with is where you have non-technical users that love Azure boards. Azure boards is brilliant because it is graphical, it is high impact, and if you put it up on a 50-inch screen, then it also has a nice, look and feel. If you look at GitHub projects, it is nice as well. But obviously, it's a different, it's a different design, it's a different design language, and it doesn't have all the customizations that are possible with Azure boards. So that's one of the things that I had a huge success with, which is integrating Azure boards in a way that's visually appealing for non-developers, effectively, for people that just want to see the cards on a board like they would do on a physical world, especially now over this remote working period. So that's been extremely successful. And you don't want to add complexity. So in that case, developers are happy with GitHub or GitHub Enterprise, and then you have non-developers that are happy with Azure boards, and everybody keep communicating back and forth because you have this thin layer of integration.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point to call out, because I think that's something that we'll see. I think we'll see a lot more organizations who are very used to the Azure boards experience and want that experience, but for things that they're doing in open source. So I think I'm going to see that wanted a lot more. I know certainly I use Azure boards for managing things better than the GitHub projects that you showed there, but there's bits in GitHub projects I wasn't aware of, because it's been a long time since I've used the project boards in them. So I probably need to revisit that.
Oh, it is evolving all the time. So I love the fact that now they finally got to the point where we have a roadmap with GitHub, and we can see what is coming, we can see what it is planned. And I love the phrase that was used by Shantanu Yogi, that was working with the garage door open. That was brilliant, because obviously we used to have the Azure DevOps feature timeline, and we used to have the roadmap on the public project. Now we have something similar on GitHub. That's what I was referring to when I thought that things were not going as I thought, because I thought that with the acquisition, GitHub was going to accelerate even more. Instead, there was a period of things going along as usual, and I didn't quite understand back then why things were going along like that. But now with the public roadmap and all the things that have been announced recently, satellite and so on, and now everything is obviously clear, and there is a clean space for both platforms. That's the question that I get the most. Shall I go to GitHub because Azure DevOps is dead? And the answer is obviously no, because Azure DevOps is not going to go anywhere. Okay, so it is clear that it's there, it's not going to go anywhere, and there are still features being developed for it. So it's all about getting the best experience for the users and the organizations that we're catering to. I see a question in the chat. For best practice for enterprise organization, what do you recommend regarding GitHub protocols, meaning good, bad, etc.? So for enterprise organizations, what I can say from the experience that I've had is that GitHub Enterprise, for example, is very similar to the github.com experience, but at the same time, once you start integrating, let's say Azure Active Directory rather than other enterprise tools, there might be some friction. And that's expected, because it's a different, it used to be very different. Now it is very close to github.com, but it still has a robust set of ACLs in place, for example, and that's not the same experience that you have with GitHub. So going with GitHub Enterprise is absolutely fine. if you want to do that, even with GitHub.com for that matter. I think it is great if you have a team that's very used to collaborative development, to open collaboration, those sort of things, and you have certain experiences that are obviously better, like the integration with SAML, Dependabot, those sort of things that just do not exist in Azure DevOps. But I can't say there is anything bad about GitHub. In fairness, it's a different experience. So to me personally, it's all about the experience. And if the team is mature enough or the team is able to get value out of the collaborative development experience, then GitHub is the place to be. Otherwise, this is not to say that Azure DevOps cannot do collaborative development. This is not to say that Azure DevOps is not for collaborative teams. It's just that GitHub being the open source experience just makes it natural, really. With Azure DevOps, you still have the concept of a team project, so you have some overhead that you need to work with if you want to do inner source, for example, and that's something that you don't have to do with GitHub. That's the main differentiator, maybe, for me. Any other question?
Not from myself. Anybody, if you want to come off mute and ask questions, please do feel free.
Yeah, please do. Please do.
It's like a quiet night this evening.
Yeah, it is. Well, it is August after all, so
true. People are starting to take holidays.
Yeah.
Kids are off school, so it's busy weeks.
All right. Oh, yep. Well, good to see that. I think that what your call has been helping so far. Thank you. That's good. And again, any question, feel free to ask. I'm available on Twitter. Feel free to ask me questions. I'm very happy to answer them. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you for your time.
No worries.
Matteo, for me, actually, this has been really good because I've been a little bit out of touch with what's gone on in the GitHub world recently. With all of the changes, I knew there was a lot that came out from GitHub Satellite recently. So it's been good to go through that stuff that I now need to go and look at and play with.
Yeah, and it is evolving so quickly that it's actually better seeing the speed, because you know that it's evolving quickly. So you just focus on what you really need at the moment, rather than sitting down for 2 months and exploring every corner of the platform. That's what I really like. So it's so good to see so many features coming in and so many different variations of features. It's not just in a single space, but you have something like code spaces, and then you have SAML, and you have Dependabot, and then now you have actions, and you will have other things in the future. So this is very nice to see, and it keeps you ticking, it keeps you going every day, even if it's not what you do on a daily basis.
Cool. Right. Thank you for that. What I'll do is I'll end the recording there, and then we can get that uploaded to YouTube at some point in the future, so that people can watch this. Again, wants to say thanks again for your time. It's been really good this evening. I've certainly learned something from this. Many things from this, actually. So it's been good for me. I'm certain it'll be good for all the watchers who watch this when we publish this to YouTube. Right. Thank you.
Cheers. I'm going to drop in a couple of minutes, but thank you very much for the feedback.